Hi, everybody. As I get comfortable there, Barry McGuire here for Barry McGuire's Creative Real Estate Education Program. It is the Monday main event. We get together as creative real estate investors every Monday to talk about all things creative. We bring on experts in finance, development, law, anything you can think of. And we talk about creative real estate, which we all love doing. I mean, that's why we're here. We also, my wife Donna and I, put on what we call focus workshops. Those are thankfully now live events after 3 long COVID years of no live events. They're now live events where we get together and deal with creative real estate topics. And we have a few coming up. At the Hotel Clique, very nice hotel that treats us well. We have a full day on wholesaling, or assignments, as some people like to call it. So that's March 18th in Calgary. Then in Ontario, on April 1st, we have a full day agreements for sale, AFS event. I'm really looking forward to that because we do want to open up the Ontario market a bit more to AFS, and that market is ripe for it now because of the turbulence in that market, which is seller financing, works well in a more turbulent market that's got some ups and downs. Plus, here's a big thing. We have a number of Ontario lawyers who have specifically gotten in touch with us to say, can we come to that event? And that's really important because you got to have lawyers on both sides who understand these creative deals, or if you don't, big trouble. And then we have as yet really unannounced event coming up at the end of May. So I'm not going to announce it because Donna doesn't want me to announce it.
Just focus on the job.
She says. All right. So today we are going to talk about accessible housing. Accessible housing. That'll be a first for the Monday main event. We haven't done that before. It's been something I've been interested in for a long time. And so we've got 3 wonderful people on who work together in the accessible housing end of things. So we're going to bring them on. I'm going to introduce them, and we are going to dive right into that topic. So that was Lindsay waving her hand, and we also have Philip and Shane. So let's start with you, Lindsay. You're a registered occupational therapist. That's what you do for your job. You're at the moment or now in the accessible housing end of things, but just give us a kind of a brief history. You finished high school, and then how did you route yourself to occupational therapy and then get interested in accessible housing as a creative strategy? Because it is a really creative strategy.
Yeah, so I actually
Lindsay.
came out of high school thinking that I wanted to be a physiotherapist. I went all the way through, did my undergrad degree, and both physiotherapy and occupational therapy are actually master's degrees, have been for 15 years now. And I applied to occupational therapy school because someone told me it looked good on my physio application. And then I got into OT school, waitlisted for physio school, and then they let me in because at the time you needed a 3.9 or better GPA to get into school. And so they gave me 24 hours to decide about physiotherapy or occupational therapy. And no knock to my physio friends, because I still love that whole aspect. But I had found out more working in the hospitals over that last year that occupational therapy provides a huge variety to life. And so I canceled my dream of being a physiotherapist and went into OT school. And it was probably one of the best decisions for me personally that I've ever made. And I just went with my gut on that. And it really fit well in the fact that my mom, growing up, ran an assisted living. So she was a recreation therapist first, and then became the manager of one of the larger assisted livings up by Spruce Grove. And so I was essentially raised in nursing homes and assisted livings. And that kind of brought me to, working in the world with people of different abilities, different ages, And then I always love to create solutions when somebody has a problem. So turned out to be a great fit for me. And then just becoming a therapist in rural Alberta, you're the jack of all trades. And so a lot of my time is spent, as Shane is right now, sitting in people's bathrooms and talking about, what works for them and what doesn't work for them in their homes. And as I saw people needing to leave their homes because the environment didn't meet their needs any longer, I was trying to think, what is a better way so people don't need to go into an environment that they don't really wish to be in? How can they stay home? How can they be in their home environment as long as possible, or for as long as they'd like?
It makes such sense as you say that. It makes total sense. And folks, as you're listening there, Lindsay said pretty quick that she needed a 3.9 grade point average to get into occupational therapy school. So that's 3.9, not out of 10 or 7.
Yeah, I guess that makes sense. Eh?
It's out of 4, right? Out of 4, 3.9 out of 4. So you're top of the heap academically to get into either physio or occupational therapy school. So that's a big thing, I think. And then the next thing is, I mean, how serendipitous that you've got that family background that kind of leads you just because of your history to see it growing up. And I mean, that is I think that's really great that's happened to you. All right. So Lindsay Kelp, folks, let's move on to Shane Parmelo. So Shane lives in Northern Alberta, which is a lovely place to live. I've lived up there myself a little bit, married, 4 kids, has done a ton of renovating work. So he understands his way around that end of things. Shane, you work in the oil and gas industry, but you work in the regulatory and environment side of that. Give us a bit of your history kind of after high school, and where did you get to where you are now?
Yeah, thanks,
How
Barry.
did you come across real estate as something else that you?
Yeah, thanks, Barry. So basically, right out of high school, I decided to go to the oil field right away. I didn't really know what I wanted to do at the time, so I thought just getting to work would be the best bet. So kind of worked up my way up the ranks in the well servicing side of things. And then in 2008, bought my first home and then started doing self-flipping to where I'm at today with my acreage. Kind of led me to where I'm at. And then in 2021, I started to immerse myself a lot more into the real estate side of things. And about a year ago, me and Lindsay kind of hit it off together and been bouncing the idea around about accessible rentals, specifically for the rural communities, because it's both near and dear to us. And then here we are today, where we're at, and can't wait to talk about more what we're up to.
Okay. Well, that also fits, and it's I think it's great that you both, I wouldn't say you have a rural focus. Things rural get neglected, and so I know you're going to talk to us about the need for accessible housing and how it's everywhere. But it's really great that you guys have the rural side of things to help out with. Well, that takes us over to Philip Shearcroft. Philip, not least,
Hello.
just because you're last, that's not it. That's not it. You got a bit of a different story. You've been investing for 15 years, starting when you were, at the ripe old age of 20, and you've done a fair bit on the investment side of things. What led you into real estate investing as you kind of finished high school and we're moving along, because you got started pretty fast.
Yeah, I did. And most of it really just came from the fact that my family was really involved in a lot of entrepreneurial spirit. So you can say that I was born into it.
Yeah.
Very inspired from my mom and my dad, of course. And they were both, entrepreneurs themselves. So I didn't waste too much time out of high school, did go to university. Once finished university, I got a little bit of a business education. And then, as I like to say, I got the real education when I came out and started to work on, my diploma of life. But it really started in my backyard when I was, when I was in BC. I did a lot of things real estate, and that's just the thing is I'm kind of a serial entrepreneur. I look at business as a function. Much like Accessible Homes, it's a business, and I think it serves a higher need than just creating a return.
Well, you know what? It seems like you three are just trying to be careful with how our feed is going here. I know I've got a bit of a delay on my end. You guys are all fine. I think it's me causing the trouble here, but it's immediately obvious that you each bring separate and important things to the business arrangement you have between yourselves with Lindsay's academic and hands-on knowledge of how things need to go in a home for it to be best occupied. Shane's construction and building, and Philip's business plus real estate background. I see it as a really good partnership for you guys. So let's dive right into it. That's great to hear the background, but let's dive into it. And the first thing that I'm around this all the time, and I don't know that I'm real familiar with the terms that people use, like accessible, barrier-free, universal design, that are how things are described in your world. So, maybe Lindsay, you can run us through some of those terms so people can better understand.
Yeah, for sure. So I like to talk to people about the language of things, and that the language is different in different places. So whenever you're talking to someone, you want to make sure that you really are talking about the same things. In the kind of the geek world of accessibility, in Alberta, we talk about barrier-free design. And so we have a barrier-free design code. Those are going to be the codes and the standards that need to be met if you want to consider something, for example, wheelchair accessible, or they're going to be the place where you look to get specific measurements or requirements. Okay. Universal design is what we all hope for, achieve for, strive for. So universal design is that you create a built environment, or sometimes they'll use it in learning. You're creating a way that the most number of people can access it. So it is not actually targeted to people with disability or different abilities. It's targeted to try and take into consideration everyone's needs. So it might be that a roll-in or walk-in shower isn't just used by someone who in a wheelchair or who has mobility difficulties. It can be used by anyone. So you're kind of encompassing as many target audience people as you can. And there's 7 principles to that. You can look up universal design, 7 principles. It's pretty awesome. And you can apply it in all real estate and broaden out your tenant profile. And then accessibility is kind of the piece. We're using that word because it's the one that people identify with. But accessibility exists on a continuum. So when we say accessible housing, most people think about wheelchair accessibility. So we think about push buttons, we think about ramps or lifts, we think about elevators, and that is a piece of it. But accessibility can mean cognitive difficulties. So it's going to be better for someone, for say, with dementia. It could mean sensory. So we may have a child with autism and we need to take that into consideration. Different pieces to that. So when we say accessible housing, for function's sake, Homes is going to set some standards and put out some amazing things that are barrier-free universal design. But that doesn't mean everyone has to or everything has to be. So we can do that from zero accessibility, typical anything, all the way to 100%, which would accommodate everyone. And so I want people to kind of think about how would they incorporate bits and pieces of that into their real estate investing. And then we can talk about how we are doing that and to what level.
That's really interesting, that it can go from 0 to 100%. Like most people who know nothing about this, I'm going, well, I'm doing the same thing. I'm doing ramps. I'm doing wheelchair in my mind. I didn't think that you could pick this and take that and kind of match and incorporate what you think would work for you in your own investing portfolio. That's really, really interesting.
Yeah. So I just want to kind of throw an example into people's minds. So lever door handles lever door handles are easier for people with difficulty using their hands. They're doing better for children. Dogs can open lever handles. That's really universal design. And, you know, the people struggling in with 5 bags of groceries because you don't want to make 2 trips, that's universal design when you can open the door with your elbow, right?
Yep. Got it. All right. Well, so for folks who have no idea about why this might be a good place to invest, let's move on to some of the the benefits investing in accessible housing. So Philip, you're not just the finance guy or the money guy here, but you're more on the money end of things. Can you talk to us a little bit about the costs without knowing anything about doing this kind of design? I'm going, it's probably 50% more to build a fully accessible home than it is to build a regular home. So talk to us a little bit about the cost side of things.
Well, I think in general, costs are always at the forefront of any kind of investment. Every time someone looks at something or assesses something, they immediately go to, okay, well, what does it cost, right? Because depending on how much it costs is where we are going to determine whether we're going to move forward with it or not. So the huge misconception and that's just it. It's a perception out there, is that the costs are that much higher, when in reality, without, in a very general sense, I'm not talking specifics, but in a general sense, it really isn't. And I think it plays in part to why a lot of people maybe avoid it or feel that intimidated by it, because they immediately say, oh, it's too expensive. No matter if you're a user or an investor or both, you're immediately going to go for that perception that the costs are so much higher, when in reality, they're not. And a lot of different products and designs, especially if they're well planned, are going to actually see that there is a very moderate difference between the two. And, and I do say that with confidence. Building materials, obviously, in recent years, a lot of my own projects skyrocketed. And it's pushed me outside of the realm of being able to accomplish a well thought out, good return on investment, and that's kind of what I look for, and moved me to different directions. But this is something that we're trying to explain to anyone really who wants to understand it, is that it really isn't that much more. And I say that with a grain of salt, because there are elements to it that do, but many elements, for example, flooring, well, it's the same flooring you do regardless. It's just how you use it and in what way, the type of material choice, for example, that makes a difference, not on the price, but maybe on the functionality of it. So it's a big difference that people's opinion is really shifted when you really get into the nuts and bolts of it, no pun intended, and just really, understand that it's not that way. It might have been many years ago when there wasn't the type of manufacturing abilities that we have nowadays, importing goods. It now opens it up to more of a reality for many people, both investor and users alike. So.
Now that's important to hear that, because I think, again, from a position of no knowledge, you just assume that if you're going to do something different, it's going to cost you substantially more, enough more that it wouldn't pay you to do this kind of design. So it's comforting to hear that it's to a large extent not a factor. And I'm guessing as we move farther along, it's going to become less of a factor. But let's talk to Shane here on the building side of things. Shane, with the the prevalence of universal design principles, are you finding that you're able to relatively easy incorporate barrier-free design and universal design principles into your projects? When you're the hands-on guy, you got to deal with safety codes officers and development guys. What's that like for you now as this strategy becomes a bit more mainstream?
Well, there is some challenges because this isn't something that a lot of builders or a lot of contractors are working with in that space. So what we've found is that there is a fair amount of teaching and education that been having to do with when we're looking at properties and analyzing and talking to contractors. And that's just because, you know, there's not a lot of knowledge in this area. And so that's an area that we're willing to help with and work with and grow. We've had a webinar last month to kind of do between me and Lindsay to kind of educate more people, either investors or developers or anyone that's really interested in it. And that's really something that, you know, part of the reason why we wanted to really go on this show is just to kind of show people what we're doing and to kind of open up that thought process that, you know, there's lots of room in the sandbox, for a lack of a better term, that we all need to work together to fill this need. And I think it's a growing need as well. So yeah.
Okay. I think those are all good things to know, because anybody who's thinking of doing this is going to have to do the things and go through the steps that you did. So it's, you know, it's good to hear from you. So now, do you think, are there 50 competitors just like you out there? Are you kind of leading the charge in this area? Where do you think you are in what's always a competitive marketplace? How competitive is it for you, Lindsay? What do you think about that?
Sorry, Barry, did you direct that to me?
Yes. Sorry.
Yeah. No problem. I was just
Lindsay got
there.
cut off there.
Yeah. No, so there is there are different pieces to the puzzle happening out there. So there are a couple of renovation companies, and there are a couple of private occupational therapists in Alberta I'm speaking about, and there is a couple in each of the provinces who are working at this. However, no one is working towards rentals, it seems like. So everything has been, you know, in your own home. What does that look like? How can we help? You know, what does that build look like? And, you know, kind of throwing a stat back there to what Philip was talking about, cost. A new build built for accessibility is actually, as per the Rick Hansen Foundation, which is kind of the gold standard in Canada, 1% more cost than a typical new build. So if you're looking at apples to apples, at 1%, yeah. Retrofits are a little bit more, but new builds are 1%. But it all comes back to what Shane and Philip were saying is the planning piece there. So really, we want people to take into account that expertise piece. So we want more competition. We are the first company that we know of, and we have looked and tried, who are looking to create more accessible rentals. So right now, our focus is on creating a very scalable, profitable business system that creates more accessible rentals in Alberta. Because once we do that and show the proof in the pudding, then others are going to jump in, and that tidal wave is just going to start to build and build and build. And who is going to benefit? But more people who are going to need those things. And the supply is so low and the demand is so high and is going to continue to increase that we need as many people in that sandbox, as Shane was saying, as possible right now. And so I think people are making do with what they have right now, but what we want for them is quality, safe places where people who can purchase or people who want to or need to rent can live comfortably and for the long term. Because once they find a place that they love, they're going to stay. People know there's no supply. So they're just going to hunker down and stay. And especially if they have great landlords, great, you know, support, that's going to be a big piece for them. So we are at the forefront of the rentals and the real estate investing, but we would love other people to join in.
Yeah. All right. Philip, I want to go back to you just to talk about the rent that you can the rent that you can get. I mean, we talked about properly done costs are actually not near more than, they're not very much more than doing normal building. Not very. I mean, it's a little bit here and a little bit there, and it varies from situation to situation. But costs are more. And can you get a rental premium, Philip, for this kind of rental, so that it pays for your extra costs? As Lindsay said, we're all in business here. We want to do well by doing good. That's what we want to do, all of us. So, Philip, how does it look on the rental end?
Well, it kind of adds to a lot of conversations I'm having nowadays, both with Alberta investors, BC investors, any investors who are providing some sort of accommodation, is that there's a scarcity of it. And that's no exception to accessible housing, is that there's an extreme scarcity to a scary low amount. So naturally, you're going to be providing a product where there's a scarcity, which, if we all know the fundamentals of real estate, the lower supply, the higher that you can charge in general, right? And that's not really the goal here, is to be the only people. It's just it's out of a form of necessity. And really, so to answer your question, yeah, it is just naturally through the service and the accommodation that you are offering, you are able to charge more. Now, how much more can differ? It can, depending on the location, depending on their needs, and depending on several other factors. But in a very general stance, you can. And that's just it. Is there's many other ways that both myself, what I do, aside from for Function's Sake Homes, where I do have accommodations where we charge more than you would a long-term renter. And I think that's what a lot of the questions that we get from interested parties is, how much better is it? Just give me a number. And it's not really so easy to shape that. But really, in a general stance, it's more. Could be $100 more a month, or could be $500. It could be even more, depending on their needs. I can tell you, it's well worth the work to be able to provide the product. You feel great. You're providing a service to people who are really in need. But yeah, to my own credit, that's kind of the questions that I've been asking our team. Okay, well, we got to make money and make sure that it's profitable. But doing good for people is excellent, but we can do more good if we're profitable, right? And that's really what it comes down to. But yes, absolutely, you can charge more, but it depends on where you are and the circumstances on how much. So, yeah.
Okay. Lindsay, I want to go back to you, because you talked about it, and Philip just alluded to it. The scarcity for we who know nothing about this. What's the size of the market for accessible housing? Is there any way to put any stats or numbers on what the size of the market is and what is available for people who do need this kind of housing?
You know what, Barry, I'm going to throw this question to Shane, because he's actually our stats and our market analysis guy, and he geeks out on this like crazy. So I could talk about it, but he'll bring the stats.
Okay.
Thanks, Lindsay. Yeah, Barry, to answer your question, the demand of accessible rentals or housing is massive. This is a tenant profile that is not being fully supported. So, for this call or webinar, I'll kind of speak to the Edmonton and surrounding area. But the three of us really agree that this isn't just an Alberta or Canada problem. This is a North American problem. We've had discussions with investors and occupational therapists from the United States, and they're seeing the same thing over there. But, in Canada, there's 1 in 5 Canadians living with a disability. So 20% of our population is living with some sort of a disability. 3 in 10, or 28%. Yeah. 28% of the people between 35 to 54 years of age anticipate a mobility, vision, or hearing challenges arising in the next 5 to 10 years. So, anything can change in the blink of an eye for anyone, and everyone knows someone that could benefit from a more accessible home. Talking about supply, lack of supply and accessible rental is really frustrating to us. I've spent a lot of time going through all the rental sites, RentFaster, Kijiji, Marketplace, anything and everything, and there is no true accessible rental. The ads that you see that claim to be accessible are typically a condo or an apartment that has, the main wheelchair ramp on the main level and then an elevator. That's it. You look into the pictures on the ad, you don't see anything in the house or in the condo that is accessible at all, which is pretty frustrating to see, because if you're claiming for it to be accessible, there should be some qualities in the property that show that. For anyone that's in the short-term rental space, another key thing for the Edmonton area is when you're looking, say either you have a disability or someone in your family has a disability and you're traveling to Edmonton and surrounding area, well, you can look through the Airbnb site or the Verbal site and look in there, and there is no rentals available. You can have big, massive lists of short-term rentals available, but once you pop in there, the wheel-in shower or anything accessible feature, I think there's only 2 or 3 accessible features on Airbnb, your list goes to 0. And for such a big city, and as many investors as there are that have a portfolio in short-term rentals in Edmonton, it's kind of disheartening to see that. On the federal level, they realized this gap in 2019. Canada passed the Accessible Canada Act, which his goal was to make Canada a barrier-free Canada by 2040. So kind of like the affordability space, where they're looking to the private sector to get help with this, because they know that they can't fill this gap without the private sector. I don't know if anyone on the call just noticed, but CMHC just gave out a universal design guide for developers, builders in the multi-unit residential space, because they know that they're going to need help as well. So they've already started to plan for this for the future. And, with the lack of demand already, with Alberta breaking net migration records quarter after quarter, the seniors population is supposed to grow by 68% in the next 20 years. It all adds to a bigger demand moving forward. And that's why I say, you need more people in the sandbox, because this is a huge, huge problem for Canada. And that's why we're here to kind of help that out.
I told you he geeks out.
Well, we don't want to call him a geek right to his face, do we?
Absolutely. That's a
we
compliment.
do. Oh, wow. All right, Shane.
I'm used to it already. She's hard
a couple
on
of
me.
questions. Let's see what we got here. Okay. All right. What does Leo have to say? Most people who apply for the MLI Select program from CMHC are not looking at the accessibility side of it. Could you please explain what are the requirements and how difficult it is to accomplish them? My goodness, Leo, pop up a question there that would take a couple of hours to answer. But, any of you able to take a shot, or at least to briefly summarize what CMHC is looking for in their pretty new MLI Select program? Who wants to take that?
I can take that one.
Okay.
Thanks for the question, Leo. But the requirements, there's a couple different ways you can achieve accessibility. And you're right, people are avoiding it out of a fear, because they're not sure what to do with it, and they're not sure what revenue it brings in. And they think that it's going to create just a ton more cost, and it's going to be difficult. But honestly, the requirements aren't that bad at all. And they should help bring up your rental revenue and allow for you to have tenants who stay in longer. So that's going to reduce your vacancy costs, right? So the requirements are that you need to meet the Rick Hansen Foundation standards. So they have different standards. We can post them up somewhere, or you can look them up on the Rick Hansen Foundation. So they're very well laid out. It's easy to look at, but you do need to use an expert. And this is going to be my hammer all day, is that you can build something to a barrier-free design code, or in that CMHC MLI Select, they use the Canadian barrier-free code. I can't remember what it is right now. It's like CH191, something like that. But it is literally code by code what you need to do. However, it's easy to build to that code and screw it up for the people who are living there. So you have to, I stress, you want somebody with lived experience, and somebody who's going to consider many lived experiences to actually then help you implement that. So architects with specialization in accessibility. So the only one that I know is Ron Wickman out of Edmonton. He's one of the accessibility gurus in Canada and was one of the main contributor to that CMHC document that Shane Pomerleau just talked about. Use an occupational therapist who does this day in, day out, because if you're just considering the lived environment and not the person as well and what they need to do. So for us, we call those occupations. That's why they're occupational therapists. We have to consider how do those three go together almost in a Venn diagram. Built environment, the person and their personality, their characteristics, etc. So we're going to use at that point a universal design lens with that person. And then the last piece being, what do they need to do that day? So is that going to be brushing their teeth? Is that going to be getting in and out of bed? Is that going to be getting in and out of their lived space, exterior to interior? So we want to consider that and consider things like seasons. I would do things differently in Lethbridge than I would do in Grand Prairie because of the wind and the drifts and the Chinooks down south. So you really want to think about all of those different pieces. So yes, there is requirements for that CMHC, but they are not nearly as daunting as you think if you have an expert on your side. The points are actually pretty easy. The biggest point that I think would be a drawback in retrofitting a multifamily for this would be that all units need to be visitable. Okay, and so what that typically means is that you need to have a zero step entry. You need to have a 32-inch entry doorway, and you need to have a bathroom that meets a couple different requirements on the main level. That's all. So those three things have to be within the whole property. So it is easier to new build that than retrofit that in something like a multifamily or an apartment building.
So turns out that's a great question from Leo. And as you were speaking, Lindsay, it reminded me of having Garth Chapman on a couple of times in the last while. Garth is a mortgage broker out of Calgary, and he and his partner are working hard in the commercial area. And he talked to us about MLI Select. And he talked about how you, as you want to participate in that program, how you get points for various aspects of what CMHC is looking to provide: accessible housing, affordable housing. They have a bunch of criteria. And I think I recall Garth saying that so far in their experience, nobody was paying any attention to the accessibility side, even though if you do that, you get huge numbers of points and way more financial benefits from CMHC. Were you on that? Did you listen to that, Lindsay? Am I remembering that right?
Yeah. Yes. And I think that people understand affordability. And I think that we absolutely need to address that. People understand sustainability. So building a little bit more green, a little more energy efficient. What investor doesn't want that in their property? Yeah. But they're not comfortable in accessibility. And you cannot get MLI Select on accessibility points alone. It was designed that way. Yeah. But when you combine sustainability and accessibility, it is quite reasonable to meet. And if we're thinking profit and revenue, then we want to think about that locking in for affordability may hurt that revenue stream over a longer period of time. And if you're building with universal design in mind, it does not limit you to people who are going to need that for accessibility. I can rent that space. You can rent that space. Anyone can use that space. So you've just opened up your tenant pool versus restricting it, but you've created diversification in your portfolio within one property. So you can hit multiple needs all at once.
Okay, that was important, and I want to do a couple more questions, and then I want to go over the 5 commonly perceived pain points. Maybe we'll get Philip to work on that one, but let's go to a couple more questions. Donna, what else do we have here? I'm looking. Donna posts the questions and I read them. Leo looks like he has a follow-up. Personalized details that need to be addressed. Most
So if
unit. Okay.
Yeah, if you're going to do that, you can do something personalized, and there is funding based on tenant first in Alberta. However, if you're following universal design principles, you should be able to accommodate those things. Someone with expertise in that area will accommodate the majority of those things or create an environment that can be temporarily adaptable using different devices, different strategies, so that that space works for that person regardless and meets accessibility. So accessibility will be flexible to accommodate people if well thought out and well built.
Yeah. All of a sudden, the notion of universal design becomes much more obvious about why it's important just because of Leo's question. All right, next question or comment. There's a lot of grants and supports for multifamily new builds. Anything for single family retrofits? Good question. I don't know.
So right now there isn't a lot of grants available, unfortunately, for single family retrofits. I think that's going to change as the time clock gets closer to that 2040 kind of guideline that Canada's looking for to be barrier free. We all think that there's going to be some new standards kind of be set in the accessibility space. It's probably going to, like it has already started with the barrier free with multifamily. I think it's going to trickle down to other funding programs. At least in Alberta, there is a few programs, like the RAMP program, the Residential Access Modification Program, which is tenant based, but you can work with your tenant in place to add value to your property. So, we plan on using that. It's not going to be a requirement for a tenant, but say we have one in and we have them set in, they're signed to a lease. We can chat about, what other value would you like to have at this property? Because there is this RAMP program where you can access funding as a tenant and change more of this house, and it's a win-win. They feel more at home. They deem it as more of a forever home, and it adds more value to our building. And in that sense, they're going to be wanting to stay longer. So it is creating that win-win. There's some First Nation community funding as well for on and off reserve. So there's that, but and then just the MLI Select. So really, there is a lack of funding in that regard right now, but I don't anticipate that to be over the long term, because I don't want to keep repeating myself, but they are going to need help from the private sector. So we all anticipate there to be more programs kind of coming down the pipeline.
All right. And folks, I think that there's an inevitability to the notion of accessible housing. It's taken a while to get going, but the big players are in there, like CMHC and the federal government. Anytime there's building codes reviewed and changed, all of this is now fully at the forefront of what people are thinking about. And no planning or revisions to building codes will be done without increasing and paying more attention to the accessibility side of it. So getting going now and understanding how it works is going to serve everyone well in the future as it becomes a much more important thing. Green, sustainability, none of that stuff is going away. It's just going to become more and more important. So having said that, I'd like to talk about the common perceived pain points. We got kind of 5, and then we can move into why those things aren't the issues that people think they are. So who of you three wants to talk about why aren't investors all over accessibility already? We're going to talk about those 5 pain points. Who wants to take that one?
Yeah, sure. I'll take that one on. Really, it kind of relates back to what we were talking about before, and the first one, the most obvious, it's too expensive, right? Which is obviously with data and just our own knowledge and experience through renovations. we can tell you that it's not. That is a huge perception, and it should be crushed. And usually it's crushed over time, and being able to show it and display it. These are the actual costs versus what it would have been if we just did a typical renovation, and how small that difference is. But that's definitely one of them, is the expense behind it. The tenant profile, that comes up a lot. Tenant profile always, although that the aging population would be the more typical tenant, right? To be in there, your health declines. Naturally, you're going to need a little more assistance through the later stages of life. But the tenant profile can be someone who's maybe at the beginning of their life, who still have those needs, who would want to have a place, like Shane said, their forever home. And that's just a small example of the mindset behind who needs accessible housing. And as Lindsay really put it, it's not really about someone who is necessarily in a wheelchair, someone who might have a different ailment, something that would affect them being able to use a home for its normal purposes. That further expands it out. So it's not necessarily someone who's in a wheelchair, which we all think about when we think about accessibility. Really the lack of trust. People are scared and don't really trust individuals with a plan like this. It can be complex without experience. Having someone like Lindsay with a tremendous amount of real world experience walking these houses with individuals who would be your tenant is really going to be the difference. That's the secret sauce, right? Where you have somebody who's like, I understand that's the design, but this is what's real. And these are the things that really affect who that person is at the end of the day. So huge one that we get a lot of time. And more on this is actually a huge one that I brought up when I first met Lindsay and Shane. We were talking about this business. I immediately thought that this is too small. It's too niche, like too specific to a certain area. And I get that a lot from other people, like, that seems very niche, right? And they keep on saying that word, but it's too small. It doesn't have the scalability. Obviously, from the stats that Shane was offering, just this conversation alone will tell you that there is an incredible application, not only through all areas in Alberta, BC, across the nation, and even into the US, right? Which is obviously, there's very different issues and ways that they do it. That comes from my experience down there. And really, the last one is just, people always feel that it can only work in urban areas. And I brought this up to myself. I was guilty of it, where I say, this can't really work in a rural area, and it needs enough people to be there to have access to it, when in fact that couldn't be more opposite, right? There is incredible standards of living that you can create in what I like to call tertiary markets, secondary markets, where, hey, guess what? The cost of purchasing a home and acquiring that asset just happens to be a lot less. But not only that, the needs of our end tenant or the user of that facility would be more inclined to be in some of those markets, or maybe even forced to be in some of those markets, and you're providing a product for them. So I know I really, kind of ripped through those really quickly, but I think those are just huge ones, that we get all the time, and we're trying to demystify, some of these elements, not only for other people to try a go at it, really, but just satisfy those types of questions. There's many more that we get beyond that, but those are huge points that people bring up when discussing it. So.
Yeah, the five big ones. The five big ones. I can see that there would also be lots more.
Yeah.
So if we flip the switch and get away from the misperceptions, I wouldn't mind, maybe Lindsay, you can take this one. Just run us through the tenant profile and tenant pool commentary on why investors should not be concerned as much as they are through their misinformation about the profile and the pool itself. Give us a bit more detail on those things.
Sure. So I think I'm just going to try and incorporate a couple comments here into my answer. So earlier, I think Crystal, who is a fabulous investor out of Red Deer, Alberta, had mentioned that she is EMS. She sees this need all the time. And that's probably why she owns a wheelchair accessible rental, which I did not know, Crystal. So we need to chat. And so I want people to think about that tenant profile. When people first think about accessibility, they think about somebody who is on a fixed income and typically in a wheelchair. Like that's the first two things that jump into their mind.
For sure.
However, kind of roping in a little bit of Crystal's comment, she has a client or a tenant, sorry, I always used to say client, a tenant who lives on AISH or Assured Income for the Severely Handicapped. That's the Alberta funding source. And she charges less. Love it, Crystal. You're doing a service. That's amazing, right? People do need that ability. What we are really looking at that tenant profile is I want to broaden your mind out and really think about who else is going to use these homes. And so that tenant profile could be seniors. So in area in Ponoka, Alberta, one of the tenant profiles that when I write it out, first thing that comes to mind is either a single person or a couple moving in off of their farm or their ranch into town. Those people have a ton of disposable income sometimes, but maybe they don't want to take on an actual mortgage, or maybe they want to try out living in town before they actually commit to things. So those are going to be, people that we don't expect. Shane mentioned that people, I think it was between the ages of 25 and 50, somewhere in there, Shane, I may be butchering the numbers there, the ages, are likely to begin having some sort of different ability within the next 5 years of their life. So I'm 35. Most of, all three of us here are in our mid 30s. That's us. My brother lives with MS, was just diagnosed a couple of years ago. 2 other good friends have been diagnosed with MS within the last year. I think everybody knows someone in the younger ages who are also going to benefit from this. Yeah. So I want you to think seniors. I want you to think families. Somebody was asking, is this married couples or single users? It can be anyone. It can be a child with different abilities, right? So one of my good friends, her little boy, unfortunately has a disease, and he is going to progressively get worse until he passes. And unfortunately, she's in a 2-story home. She is an occupational therapy and physiotherapy assistant. So she's very knowledgeable and has started to modify her home, but they know that that's not going to last long term unless they make some major changes within their home, because his care will continue to get more and more, and his mobility and his cognitive ability will continue to decline more and more and more. So it could be a family with children with disability. It could be that you have a loved one who you want to be able to come into your home. And I've seen this many, many times. So there was this family, I know them very well, and they were having Thanksgiving dinner. And it's a big family. It was the first time the person who usually hosted had sold their home and moved. And so when they brought this one family member in who is living in a wheelchair, very cognitively well, but had been in a severe accident in his life, he had to stay in the foyer and eat Thanksgiving dinner down in the foyer while everybody else was upstairs or downstairs. And, there's 30, 40 people in the house. So somebody's always with, but that's just not, it doesn't make anyone feel good. And it's not okay. So when I think about it, if my friends or my family are coming to my home, I want them to be able to participate in my life and participate in my home. So there is no one that I consider not to be within the tenant profile to really answer that question, because it's either going to be yourself, maybe a loved one, maybe a friend. Do they live there? Do they not? All of those things need to be considered. And I think Shane was talking about immigration being, increasing to Alberta time over time over time. Multi-generational housing is going to continue to increase and is increasing in so many ways. So we want to think about how do we accommodate all of those different needs within any type of build. Yeah. And so when you have that tenant profile, you can look at what needs need to be met what level of accessibility am I willing to accommodate within that retrofit or that build? And what is my purpose there? And then coming right back to Crystal, I really appreciate that people are putting out rentals at lower rates. We are looking at right now our I guess target is the people who are going to be able to pay. So it might be two individuals living with AISH that combine their income, or someone who can afford a little bit of that premium. And it is actually a fairly significant premium in most markets. Because then when we have good profits, we can then take that money and do good things and give back, or create a subsidized rental, or add back into the community. So for us, it's let's move this forward. Let's take that first stage one, target a certain tenant profile, and then we are going to be able to expand that and help more tenants.
Thanks for that, Lindsay. Now, before we answer Leo's question, we're going to finish up here, hopefully with Shane being able to just talk about the 3 social capital aspects. You need a solid business model, but in our business, Don and I always talk about win-win and not taking advantage and giving back and solving problems. And so the social capital side of your business, I think, is really important. But do any of you think you can take a crack at Leo's question on, do we need about a third of our rental housing to be accessible? That's maybe a tough one, but
Yeah, I can take this. It is pretty hard to put a number on that. It's the more you dive into the stats and information on there through various sites, mostly through Statistics Canada, is that the problem is big already and it's only going to grow. Does that mean we need to have about a third of the rentals on the market to be accessible? Hard to say, because many will go to the assisted living facilities, or if you're a senior, maybe the retirement homes. So it's kind of a loaded question, Leo. So I would say, it's right now, majority of people are probably going to assisted living, and I don't know how many people have looked at cost involved, but if you're looking at Edmonton, if you're looking for a 2-bedroom assisted living property or place to stay, a unit, looking at between $3,500 and $4,000, and that's in Edmonton. If you are in the lower income, your subsidy rentals are available too, and that would be lower, closer to the 2,000 mark. But there has to be some different parameters involved with getting that to get there. So I would say we need more help in this area, and it's probably not very far off, I would say.
All right. Thanks for that, Shane. And we're going to finish up with just this is kind of a summary. We've talked about social capital really throughout, but I was going to say, Shane, you can do this, but whoever of the 3 of you want to just finish off with telling us how you see the social capital side of thing, and then we're going to make sure everybody knows how to reach you. So who wants to take social capital?
We fought over this one, but I'm going to take it.
Okay. All right.
Really, when we talk social capital and social equity, it's what good are we doing? What is the non-fiscal benefit to providing this service or these environments? And I think that everyone can think about, we want to create more availability. A third of the market, Leo, yeah, that would be ideal. People are really good at living and making do with what they have. But man, wouldn't that be amazing if they had the best or better or more suitability in their home? So things weren't just so darn hard, right? Then I want to think about, what can we do in creating that profitable, scalable business to generate revenue? Then what are we doing with that revenue to then help be part of that solution? And everybody wants to be part of a solution. That's our why, right? Is how do we help others through our good social business practices? And once we do that, we can help X number of people, and then that's going to grow and that's going to grow. And then lastly, we all have loved ones and experiences that have not been the best. This is part of why I do not work for Alberta Health Services anymore, is because I was tired and disappointed. I felt like every day I went to work, I was a disappointment, or I brought negativity to people by telling them, sorry, I'd actually recommend you don't live in your home any longer because of X, Y, Z. You can't manage here. Your family can't manage here. A worker might be hurt in home care. You might be hurt. But hey, if we could take this and, throw a renovation in, you'd be able to stay there. Or you might be able to stay in your home where maybe you've lived for 50 years with your partner. Maybe you've brought your babies home there. Maybe it's a family property. It's a 100-year farm out anywhere in rural Alberta. And to be able to stay within those community ties of those, as Philip calls them, tertiary markets, as Shane and I call them, rural awesome communities, right, where we live. Or in the city, even within the city, there's those pockets of community. So people have more choice to choose, where do I live? How do I live? And really, as an investor, when I invest my money, I expect more than a fiscal return. I expect there to be a benefit outside of that. Otherwise, I'm not investing in that particular enterprise, because to me, every piece of money could do more good.
Yeah, I couldn't. That's just a wonderful way to describe the social capital side of what you do, Lindsay. Thank you very much for that. Well, we've come to the end of this, and my eyes have been opened. I've been around the real estate game for a long time, but I'm a baby in this end of it, and this was so helpful for me to understand what appears to be a hugely underserved market with such a great need, with the ability to have a proper business, make a decent profit, and to feel good about and really contribute. It's not just money. If it was just money, I mean, that wouldn't be it. So that's been absolutely wonderful to have you guys come on and talk about that. So for all you guys who are listening, the name of the company is For Function's Sake Homes Ltd. Did you guys put that together like that just to give us all a little nudge? I think you did. For Function's Sake Homes Ltd. And Donna has put other contact details up in the chat. If you're interested in this at all from any perspective, that's how to get hold of Lindsay and Philip and Shane. They got a lot going on. This is going to be a rocket. Donna, we're going to have to schedule them to come back, because I want to hear what kinds of, I'm dying to hear about progress as you guys roll through this. So thank you very much for coming on and opening our eyes. Mine certainly have been opened. So with that, we're going to thank you again, and we'll say goodnight to everybody, and we'll see you next time. Good night, everybody.
Thanks, Barry.
Thank you.
Cheers.